only China, referring to the kings of the east. And by the way, Armageddon is when the whole world marches on Jerusalem. This is another thing about the geopolitical alignment of nations. Israel's the most hated nation on earth today. The United Nations has censured Israel more than any other nation combined. They hate Israel. They are trying to force Israel to give up Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, to the Palestinians is their capital, and the Israelis are saying Jerusalem is our indivisible, eternal capital. And that statement is going to cause Armageddon. Armageddon is the world marching against Israel to force them into either a two-state solution or to drive Israel into the Mediterranean and give it all to the Palestinians, whatever the spirit is like during that time. This is Zechariah 12. The Lord will save the tents of Judah first, so that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall not become greater than that of Judah. In that day, the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This is talking about the second coming. The one who is feeble among them in that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them. It shall be in that day that I will seek to destroy, listen, all the nations that have come against Jerusalem. And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. National redemption for Israel at the second coming, where the whole nation gets saved in one day. A glorious event after horrific losses during the tribulation for the Jewish people. But the world has marched on Jerusalem. And it doesn't say in this text that there's any exception to this. It says the world at that time is going to march on Israel. And God's going to destroy all of those nations that have marched against Jerusalem. Let me say this now, and you look at India, you look at China, you look at Pakistan. These are Muslim nations, Hindu nations, and atheist nations. These are not Christian nations, even though there are many Christians in those nations. Nationally, these are anti-Israel and anti-Christian nations. But I want to talk something about the Antichrist spirit, because we think of the Antichrist and you say, well, the Antichrist is going to arise from the old Roman Empire. That's correct. He will, according to Daniel 9. Okay. However, the Antichrist spirit is anywhere that Jesus is rejected. This is 1 John 2. Who is a liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist, who denies the Father and the Son. Whoever denies the Son does not have the Father either. He who acknowledges the Son has the Father also. Who is Antichrist? Except for him who denies that Jesus is the Christ, the Father and the Son. So China, India, you go through all of these nations, what they have in common. What is it that all of these nations have in common that are marching on Jerusalem? They reject Jesus. They reject the gospel, and they're anti-Semitic. That's what they have in common. So that's one text in Revelation 16 talking about the kings of the east. And I'm saying, yeah, I think that China is going to be involved in that. They'll probably be the big brother and all of that, but I don't think they'll be the only ones. By the way, that's the most populated area of the world. But here's a fascinating scripture from Revelation chapter 9. And this, I do believe, is talking about China. Revelation chapter 9. Then the sixth angel sounded. This is the sixth trumpet. Okay. There were the seals that began the judgments of Revelation. Then there are the trumpets. Then there are the bowls. This is the sixth trumpet. The sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. It's a bunch of folks. Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision. Those who sat on them had breastplates of fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. And the heads of the horses were like heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and brimstone. By these plagues, a third of mankind was killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which came out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails are like serpents, having heads, and with them they do harm. Hear about a horse with a head like a lion and a serpent tail. And this is John in the first century trying to explain 21st century weaponry. Okay, fighter jets, attack helicopters, tanks, those kinds of things like that. he's seeing these visions that the Lord is showing him about the end, and he's trying to put it in their present terms, because at that point, of course, that's all you had as far as a military, vehicle of delivering you toward a war. And so he's trying to describe this. So this is Tim LaHaye, who is a end-time scholar. He's with the Lord now. He wrote the Left Behind series that some of you have read. He believes that the seal judgments are the first 21 months of the tribulation. In other words, the first quarter of the tribulation, because the tribulation is made up of 3.5 years, 42 months, 42 months. He believes that the trump is going to happen around the middle of the tribulation. And this army is not designated, even though the Euphrates River now is mentioned again, it's not designated as China or the kings of the East. It's just designated as this army of 200 million people coming. By the way, there were around 200 million people when John wrote this on the earth. Okay. So 200 million people. If I came to you right now and I said, hey, there's going to be this war that's going to happen in a couple of thousand years, and there's going to be one army of 8 billion people, you would go, whoa, Jimmy, that's what he was saying. The Earth's population today is around 8 billion people. Okay. Back when John wrote this, when he heard the number of the army, it was just this, what? I mean, 200 million people? So through the ages, scholars have looked at that scripture, and there's what they've said. This is a demonic army. I mean, obviously it's talking about demons that have been released, that day, month, and hour. And so this is a demonic army. Wait. Okay. So for many years, for many centuries, this was thought of as a demonic army because you couldn't muster an army of 200 million people. But now we have one nation, China, superpower, super aggressive, trying to dominate the world. Absolutely trying to dominate the world right now. Extremely aggressive in militarily, economically, politically, right on down the line, permeating every area of American culture. In fact, I read an article this morning that they're buying up our oil reserves down in the Permian Basin here in Texas. So we have an extremely aggressive, evil type of a nation in China. So they have 1.5 billion people. Well, how many men do they have? Well, first of all, remember, in 1979 until 2016, China had a one-child policy, and Chinese highly preferred boys over girls. So there were a lot of abortions of girls, or a lot of murders of girls that were born so that they could have a boy. And so now what we see in China is a massive nation made up mostly of men. Here, how many men? Okay. There are 435 million men in China, over 435 million between the ages of 15 and 24, or in 54, between 15 and 54. 435 million. Let's just say of that 435 million, you just disqualify half of them. You still have more than 200 million. You have one nation. Again, this could be a coalition. It could be, China, India, Pakistan, all these different nations come together and create a coalition. Could be. But see, for years, what scholars believed is there's just not enough people to make that kind of an army. Well, there is today. And not only is there the ability of it, China has the largest standing army in the world today, with a massive budget for their military, only second to the United States. And so we see today a nation that is against Israel, that is very, very aggressive militarily. And not only do I believe will they be at Armageddon, a third of mankind is killed by this plague. There's one army, rather than America, but there's one army in the world today that has the most nuclear weaponry, that has the most sophisticated weaponry, and it's China, and they could kill a third of mankind right now. If they unleash their military arsenal, remember I said on the last program, America will be decimated by the rapture. 330 million Americans, okay? We have fewer Americans than they have men between the ages of 15 and 54. America has 330 million people, around 100 million will disappear at the rapture, somewhere around there. We're decimated, but not China. A lot of Christians in China. China will still be very powerful. And so a third of mankind is killed by this one plague of the army of 200 million. And I believe it could very well be China. And by the way, when it's describing the horses, it's describing a military invasion, and he's just using horses as a symbolism here, but it's talking about the age of technology that we have right now and the super powers of weapons out the front or out the back or wherever it is. It says, by these three plagues, a third of mankind was killed by fire and smoke and brimstone, which came out of their mouth. But it talks about the breastplates had fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. Those are China's colors. China's flag is red and yellow, but the classic traditional colors of China in their art, in their social society is red, blue, yellow. So I believe this is China without a doubt, that they match the description here. I believe they'll be present. They are present. I believe they'll be present during the tribulation. They'll do a tremendous amount of devastation. And I believe they'll also be present at Armageddon. So I hope that helps.